Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with another brand new Takara Tomy release. We actually have a brand new species entering the line, and I'm very excited about it because it's also the first time I've had the opportunity to enter this species into my collection. This is the Tyrannomimus, and that is a very cool species from Takara Tomy. I'm loving the fact that lately they seem to be kind of diving into the more obscure species, which is really cool, really exciting, and I'm hoping that they get some rebirth figures out once Rebirth, actually gets closer to the release like we had for the last few films. But you can see again the box art looks pretty cool, nothing super amazing, just basically showing a whole bunch of images of the figure and everything as you move along. You can very clearly see that from the size of the box. It's going to be a pretty small one. So let's go ahead, pop the box open and check it out. So first of all, we've got ourselves some cards in here, one of which does have some English, which is good for us so that we can read it. Again, if you are not fluent in English, maybe this other card will help you out, but you can see again, definitely cool to see some information and everything on the species and everything over here on the card. And then of course we also have our Tyrannomimus itself, and look at how small it is. This is definitely one of the smallest Takara Tomy figures that I have had so far. I think the only one I can really think of off the top of my head as far as these type of articulated figures would be maybe Velociraptor Beta would be smaller than this. I could very well be wrong, as I'm not super familiar with each and every one of the Takara Tomy figures that are out, but I think that this might be one of the smallest. So I'm actually going to readjust the camera, bring it up just a little bit so it's easier to take a closer look at it. So once we bring it in, you can see, again, a pretty decent looking head sculpt here for the dinosaur. You can see the eye is painted with basically just a light yellow and a black, but the light yellow is actually fairly similar to the body color of the dinosaur, so it's actually kind of hard to really make out and decipher the variation of color there, but there is definitely a different shade of yellow in that area. You can see we've got a gray as you lead out into the snout of our Tyrannomimus. You can also see the nostrils sculpted out and the mouth itself sculpted quite nicely. We have a blue, like a blue-green, that moves over the top of the head and runs down through the back of the neck, but then transitions away as we lead down into the body, and then actually briefly transitions to a yellow before picking up a brown moving along the back. We can definitely see that the dinosaur is feathered. It has some very nice, very fine feathers through the course of the figure, which is nice. No variation of color for the underside, unfortunately. As you move down, you do have an articulated neck, so it can go up and down, which is pretty nice. Leading along a little further, we can see the feathers a little bit more impressive here in the stomach. You can definitely see them, again, when it comes to the fine detail, a lot nicer down here, but I think the color isn't really doing it any favors. Like, the brighter yellowish tone makes it harder to really see the feathers, I think, because when you move up into the back and you see that brownish tone, it's a little bit easier, in my opinion, to make out the feather detail up there. But as you move down into the arm of the dinosaur, it does look a little bit thin and kind of awkward and almost sick, like it's starved a little bit. But leading down a little further, you do pick up some pretty nice plumage on the back of the arm, and you have a dark brown as well as a really vibrant blue that leads along the ending there of the feathers, which looks really cool. And even the feather detail itself in that area is pretty decently done. Obviously, we've seen more detail on other figures, but for Takara Tomy, I think it looks pretty nice. As you lead along to the front, you can see, if my camera will focus, the hands, there we go. You can see the hands. You got like some scoots moving down the fingers and then black for the nails. They are very sloppily painted, at least on the right arm you can see. Our left currently, but the right arm of the dinosaur you can see. They are a little sloppy, but for some reason they're a little bit more precise and nicer on the left arm. So that's weird. We do, of course, have arm articulation, forward and back, which is actually really nice because if you know the Takara Tomy figures, most times they pick one area and not the other. Like, you'll usually have either articulated arms and stagnant legs or articulated legs and stagnant arms. But this one actually has articulation in the arms forward and back as well as articulation in the legs. So it seems as though Takara Tomy is finally learning that they can articulate numerous areas of the figure and that actually improves them. But as you move down through the leg, you can see the musculature of the thigh. You can also see the feathers. As we lead down and the feathers kind of taper away down into like the calf, you can see we have more of a skin textured look, but the color doesn't change, so it doesn't really decipher the skin texture from the feathers. And you can see leading down, the feet are pretty big and bulky and not very good looking, but overall they're pretty much what I expect from Takara Tomy. Again, the nails are painted with a black, and yes, the dew claws are painted, which is a plus. And then we move back up into the tail, and as you lead out, you just got a nice little tail with a little slight curve to it as you lead out, the brown following along the back, tapering away as you lead out closer toward the tip, and then basically just the yellow. And again, the legs articulate pretty much all the way around, just to kind of give you an idea of how smooth the articulation of the legs is. And of course, it's going to look pretty much the same from both sides. You're not going to really see any huge difference from one side to the other, but even though it's not the greatest figure in the world, I think it's actually pretty nice, and definitely, again, very fun to have an articulated version of this dinosaur. Now, it's nice to even have this dinosaur at all in my collection, but an articulated version is even more fun. As far as a size goes, and I guess we could put the head forward a little bit just to kind of give us a better length, but you're looking at around 4 inches, slightly over 4 inches or 10 centimeters. And then for a height, now I guess we'll put the head back up a little bit higher to give us a little bit more height on the figure. You're looking at about 2.5 inches or a little over 6 centimeters, but not quite at 6.5. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Peppo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Colovosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect Day Human Being next to our Takara Tomy Tyrannomimus. And you can see, again, it's nice and small, definitely a lot smaller than most other figures we have here, of course, except for the Collect Day Human. But you'll also notice that it's not too far off as far as being accurate in size to the Mattel line. Maybe it needs a little bit more size, but you know, it's not that far off. It could just be a younger version of this dinosaur, so that's pretty neat. And then for another comparison, we also have a Mattel Velociraptor and Dilophosaurus next to our Tyrannomimus, showing you that, again, it is really quite small. And for one final comparison, we also have a Mattel Mini and a Captives Mini next to the Tyrannomimus to show you that it is a little bit bigger than a mini figure, but it's not too far off overall. So this brand new Takara Tomy articulated Tyrannomimus is a pretty fun figure, and I'm really going to keep my fingers crossed that they continue to release stuff like this moving into the future, because, like I said, I'm really loving these obscure species, and I'm actually really quite enjoying this figure even more than the standard Takara Tomy, because, first of all, we don't have any awkward-looking ball joints. Yes, you can kind of see them in some of the areas of articulation, like the neck and the arms. You see that little section there, the circular area that shows the articulation, but I think the figure as a whole looks a lot better than some of the other Takara Tomy figures where we have those awkward ball joints out in the tail and stuff. Not to mention the fact that we now have articulation in the neck, the arms, and the legs gives me high hope that maybe they'll continue doing that in the future, because there's no reason really not to articulate the figure overall, especially when, you know, some of the times you'll see that they've connected the arms afterwards, and I feel like it sometimes takes a little more work to just glue the arms on, or however they do it, then rather than just articulating them and just popping them onto a joint. I feel like that would be very easy, and obviously when it comes to this figure, you know, it pays off, because I love the fact that it has articulation overall and outside of the tail, and definitely helps when it comes to display. The figure as a whole looks pretty decent. Again, the detail is alright looking. It's not super vibrant, but I think it looks decent enough. Some of the areas like the legs and the arms and stuff look a little awkward, like they look a little starved and kind of shrink wrapped in some areas, but then you get like big clown feet and stuff for the figure, which do help it stand. I will say that it does stand pretty nicely. But overall, again, it's a decent looking sculpt, but a very cool species choice and an okay paint job. Nothing overly flashy, but it's alright for what it is. I was lucky enough to actually find this one on Mercari through a US seller that somehow had this already, which is pretty crazy, because I actually recently spoke to Dino Mike Mac. He's the one that usually scores me my Takara Tomy figures, and he hasn't even been able to find this in his area yet, so I was actually pretty lucky to find this one already. But if you are interested, again, it should start to show up on eBay. I will give a look on eBay just to see if I can find a listing I can include in the description, so you can add it to your collection as soon as possible. But if not, just keep an eye out for it. It should be releasing and showing up on those websites sometime very soon, like AliExpress and eBay and stuff. And of course, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.